was a senior in high school, I was in a class called Lifetime Fitness. It was a really easy class where we basically just played games like golf, tennis, and basketball. One day, we had a planned field trip to go canoeing and fishing at a lake. I wasn't much of a fisher, and I really didn't like to swim, but it got me out of 2 other classes because it was a 3-hour field trip. So overall, I was glad to go. It was about a 30-minute drive to get there, and once we did, we had the options to go fishing or canoeing. The lake was pretty big and had a park area with a dock and a large woods around it. I went fishing with my friend Sean for a little while. I had no interest in canoeing, so we decided to go for a walk on a path in the woods after we were done fishing. I didn't think we were supposed to be leaving the area where we were, but we were high school kids and we knew when to be back and where. We walked for about 15 minutes talking about school and sports, and then Sean had to pee, so he walked a couple of feet into the woods. When he came back, he said he noticed a bright green color coming from the woods. The woods was fairly thick, but when we went in and looked closer, we could see the green that appeared to be a tent. We didn't know who would be in a tent out there, but we were curious, so we decided to investigate. As we approached the tent, we saw some blankets next to it, and then we peeked inside. There were more blankets, some food, and even cleaning supplies. It appeared that somebody was living in there. Then we saw the drugs. There were many bottles of alcohol and various other drugs in the corner, partially under a blanket. We debated going back and reporting it. Just then, we heard noises of something in the woods coming from the path. We turned and ran a little farther into the woods, and then looked back to see a very skinny and dirty-looking man walking to the tent. He approached the tent, and then he saw that it was open. We heard him shout an expletive and then look around. Sean had already took off running. I followed, and it didn't take long for the man to see us and begin to run after us. We ran as fast as we could, getting hit with many tree branches and plants. Eventually, we reached the lake. We chose to run along the edge of it, and after a couple minutes, we couldn't see the man anymore or hear him. We were now lost, though. We tried to walk quietly and make our way back to the path or out of the woods somehow. We walked and walked for what felt like forever. Then, we came across the man again. He saw us and began to chase us again. We took off running, but this time we split up. Sean went one direction and I went the other. The man ended up chasing after me. I saw him pick up a stick and run with it. I knew I was faster than him, but with all the trees, it was hard to get around, and I also didn't know where I was. After about a minute, I had gotten far enough away from the man, and then I saw him trip over a log and fall over. I kept running, and before long, I had lost him. About 10 minutes later, I was able to get back on the path. I then texted Sean, and eventually he made it out. We walked back to the dock with about 20 minutes to spare before our field trip was over. When I was in 3rd grade, my history class took a field trip to an old mansion. I don't even remember exactly why we were there, but it was kind of in the city, and I think it was like 200 years old. We got inside, and we were given a tour first. When I say it was a mansion, I really mean it was a mansion. It had 2 floors, a basement and an attic, with about 10 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. It also had lots of other rooms, like a library, several offices and living rooms, and a large kitchen. There was about 15 of us in the class, and after the tour, they let us look around on the main floor. They weren't watching us that closely, however, and I wanted to see the upstairs again, so I just walked up there by myself when no one was looking. Once I got upstairs, I noticed the smell that old buildings have oftentimes. I began looking at the bedrooms. I enjoyed history, and the house was actually very interesting to me. After looking at several bedrooms upstairs, I entered one on the end. I walked over to the window to see the view, but when I did, I heard a noise coming from the closet. I was a little confused and looked over at the closet. It was a really old closet and I didn't know what would be making the noise, so I started to open it, but then I really got the creeps and I decided to leave the room. I began to walk back out of the hall, and when I did, I heard footsteps coming from the room. I turned around, and what I saw was a man standing in the doorway of the room, staring at me. He was wearing a black shirt, gray pants, and just stood in the doorway and gave me a creepy smile. I turned and ran as fast as I could down the hall, downstairs, and back to the group. I don't know who that man was, but I really don't want to know. When I was a freshman in college, I had to take a geology class. For the class, we went on a field trip for extra credit. I'm not the best at science, so I figured I should go on the field trip to boost my grade a little. We went to a park that I guess had many different kinds of rock formations or something. It was an old park, and the professor gave us all a little checklist with a worksheet, and after briefing us for a few minutes, sent us out to complete the worksheets. There was about 20 of us in the class, and the park was pretty big, so we all spread out. I went with my friend John, and we decided to go far out to fill out the worksheet. We went up a hill and over some rocks and started working. We were actually able to complete it pretty quickly, as it was a pretty easy assignment. After we were done, we decided to explore a little. We walked for a few minutes and then came upon a large man that was walking down the trail. He approached us and told us that his friend had passed out and needed our help. He said his phone was dead and we needed to follow him quickly. Without hesitating, we followed the man. He started to run, and so did we. After about 2 or 3 minutes of jogging, we came upon a little wooded area. The man stopped and said his friend was behind a tree. We didn't see anybody, however. We looked around for a couple seconds, but then to my surprise, I saw several men come out from behind the trees in all directions. They were all rather large, and one of them was holding a stick in his hand. The original man we were with then told us to give them our wallets and phones. My friend John told him no. A man then came up to John and pushed him to the ground. I tried talking to them, saying to relax. They then all began to yell at us. We were surrounded, and finally, I decided to give in and took out my wallet and phone and handed them to one of the men. John did the same. They then told us to walk farther into the woods. I knew we had to try to run away. I whispered to John to run when we had a chance. We were still surrounded, so I pretended to trip over a rock and fall to the ground. When I did, I acted as if I hurt my leg really bad. They yelled at me to get up, but I said I couldn't, and they started to walk closer to look at me. At that point, the attention was taken off John, and he turned and ran, and I got up and ran between two of the men. It was pretty close, but I was able to escape. They all began running after us then. We ran as fast as we could. We ran, and we could hear the men behind us the entire time. Finally, we approached the hill we were originally at. We then started yelling, and the men had stopped chasing us. We got back to the group, but the men still had our phones and wallets. After reporting the incident, they were able to actually track my iPhone to an old house, and 2 of the men were caught. It was the scariest field trip memory of my life.